Merry Christmas.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
We Democrats know so much, that is true.
I am not the expert on geopolitics on this issue.
We have to kind of tell everybody how smart we are.
We look at these figures and we say, oh, unemployment is low, everything is fine, right? Well, unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs.
That is true, how smart we are.
You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables.
And we have to kind of tell everybody how smart we are.
The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
President Trump's proclamation is a historic decision which carried the relationship to even higher ground.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged.
An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
And good Friday to you. Welcome to this edition of Focal Point. Fred Jackson sitting in for Brian Fisher. Lord willing, be back early next week. And glad to fill in for Brian. But I tell you what, if you thought it was going to be a quiet Friday in December, news-wise, think again, folks. And just because the election is over doesn't mean politics is coming to a close and they're going to take a Christmas break. There is all kinds of news to talk about, and we got to jump into it right away. The Daily Mail recording at this hour that we may get an announcement of a resignation of Chief of Staff General John Kelly this afternoon, Chief of Staff to President Trump. Apparently, there, according to these reports, and we've heard these before, friction between the two. His expected replacement, according to these sources, is Nick Ayers, who is the young Chief of Staff to Vice President Mike Pence. That's what we know at this hour. It's Friday afternoon, but there's a few hours left. There could be announcements coming out of Washington on that. Also going on in Washington at this hour, the House Judiciary Committee has called back former FBI Director James Comey. They want him to testify again under oath. His handling of the Hillary Clinton email scandal, or his non-handling of it, and also what he had to do with regards to the FISA court applications, the applications that opened up the idea of spying on Trump people. Here's what we know. First of all, you may remember, as reported earlier this week, that Comey was refusing a subpoena. In fact, at one point he was going to court to fight even appearing before this House Judiciary Committee today. But then they struck a deal. He would go in and sit down behind closed doors if they promised, the committee promised, they would release a full transcript of what happened behind closed doors today within 24 hours. The Republicans agreed to that. All right, we are getting leaks out of that hearing at this hour. Here's what's happening, is that James Comey is facing all kinds of questions about how he handled the Hillary email investigation. But he's got a lawyer sitting beside him, a lawyer from the Justice Department that basically, according to Darrell Issa, Republican from California, who sits on that committee, his lawyer is saying, don't answer that question. Don't answer that question. Don't answer that question. So they're getting basically nothing out of James Comey. So that's how that one is going so far today in that hearing. We also hear that the House Judiciary Committee may call Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein in for sworn testimony as well, because of reports, you may remember this, is that early on, back before the Republicans took control of the Justice Department, he was suggesting that they might wiretap President Trump. So they want to call him back. Now, you remember, he has said basically, I was just joking. I may have said that, but I was just joking. But Darrell Issa, once again, is telling us they've got word that maybe he wasn't joking, that he was somewhat serious in that suggestion. So that may be happening. We're not sure what on the time frame. Now, we started off our day with other big news. President Trump nominating William Barr, former President George H.W. Bush's Attorney General, to serve in that new role. Of course, the Justice Department right now is without an Attorney General because of the resignation earlier of Jeff Sessions, under pressure, we know, from President Trump. Those two did not get along pretty well from the get-go. So now we hear that the president confirmed it this morning on the White House lawn just before heading out for a business meeting today in Kansas City, that he's going to nominate William Barr. Now, it's kind of interesting. We have heard, throughout the funeral proceedings this week of George H.W. Bush, he has been lauded, been praised as being a wonderful, great president. Well, one of his attorney generals was William Barr. Barr served as Attorney General of the United States under Bush 41 from 91 till 93. All right? So you would think there would be bipartisan support for William Barr. Think again. Because already there are questions perhaps that are going to be raised by the Democrats, opposition to this nomination. For instance, Barr told the New York Times about a year ago in a story about Sessions directing his prosecutors to look into actions related to Clinton that there, quote, is nothing inherently wrong about a president calling for an investigation. He also said there was more reason, this is Barr speaking, more reason to investigate a uranium deal approved while Clinton was Secretary of State in the Obama administration than potential collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign. Now remember, this is an interview that Barr gave about a year ago to the New York Times. He said, to the extent it is not pursuing these matters, the department is abdicating its responsibilities. He also wrote in an op-ed for the Washington Post in May of last year, defending Trump's decision to fire former FBI Director James Comey, one of the actions Mueller has been examining for possible obstruction of justice. He was quoted 2 months later in a Post story expressing concern that members of Mueller's team had given contributions to Democratic candidates. What was he talking about there? Basically, all the lawyers appointed to work with Robert Mueller on the investigation of the alleged collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians. They're lawyers, they're Democrat lawyers who gave extensively to the Democratic Party. No bias there. Here's what Barr said, in my view, prosecutors who make political contributions are identifying fairly strongly with a political party, Barr said. I would have liked to see him have more balance on this group. So, President Trump asked this morning, he said this was his first pick to replace Jeff Sessions, William Barr. We'll see what happens. As I said, he has enjoyed bipartisan support, William Barr that is, and certainly going back to his tenure as Attorney General under George H.W. Bush between 91 and 93. Democrats were okay with him then. We'll see what's going to happen. Certainly Barr's interview with the New York Times and with that editorial that he wrote for the Washington Post last year are likely going to be brought back up by the Democrats as evidence that he already is biased. No, I think William Barr is just saying what a lot of people have been saying. They're wondering about the extent of James Comey in his investigation of Hillary's email scandal, where he basically let Hillary Clinton go. They also want to know, with regards to the application to the FISA court to spy on Trump people, they want to know how much James Comey was involved with that. And also the whole credibility of the Mueller investigation, as I say, using largely lawyers who have contributed extensively to Democratic Party. So that's all coming up, folks. There'll be obviously before the Senate Judiciary Committee, there'll be a hearing for the nomination today of William Barr. We'll see how that goes. Fresh on our minds, let's face it, folks, is how the president's Supreme Court nominee was treated, Judge Kavanaugh, recently. I don't expect things to be any different. Now, the Republicans, they still control the Senate, even more so now with 3 extra Republican senators elected in November. But I still expect it to be a fight, a bitter fight, when William Barr comes up before them. But also today, the president making another announcement saying he's going to nominate State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert as the next U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Trump describing Nauert to reporters as very talented and very smart. She, of course, would replace Nikki Haley, who I think most Christians, most conservatives would agree has done a terrific job as our ambassador to the United Nations. In particular, Nikki Haley taking head on terrorist-sponsoring nations like Iran. And, most importantly, getting behind the president's agenda to show strong support for the nation of Israel. So, a lot of people, now you certainly know the face of Heather Nauert because she was on Fox News just a couple of years ago. She was one of their news anchors. Very bright lady. But since then, when Trump was elected president, she went to be a spokesperson for the State Department and still holds that job under Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. So she's had a couple of years of learning about foreign affairs if she didn't have that experience before. Now, you're also going to see a report out there that UN ambassador won't be part of the cabinet. Now, the spin that's being given is that unlike Nikki Haley, who has been a member of the Trump cabinet, that Heather Nauert would fall under the State Department and not be a member of the cabinet. And it's being spun already as being a demotion, a decreasing of the value that President Trump puts on this position of U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Well, that's not really true. The reality is, if you look at the flow chart of how things work for the ambassadors, is that the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations has always come under the State Department. In other words, it has not been a cabinet position. But Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina, when she took the job of ambassador, insisted on being part of the cabinet. So the position was elevated to a cabinet position because of the insistence of Nikki Haley. But the word is that it will return to its normal position, that being under the Secretary of State Department. So Heather Nauert, we'll have to see. Now, I'm not clear on this yet, but I don't believe, because it will return to be under the State Department, I'm not sure there has to be hearings for Heather Nauert on that. So, as I say, an incredibly busy news day today, and certainly it is not over. But these nominations, the nomination in particular, I think, of William Barr is the most fascinating. We're well aware that as soon as Jeff Sessions was appointed and recused himself from the investigation into alleged collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians, when he recused himself, the relationship between President Trump and Jeff Sessions went downhill. Many Republicans encouraging the president long ago to fire Jeff Sessions, and he did not do that. Jeff Sessions, a good man from Alabama, a great senator from Alabama, but there's been friction there right from the beginning. And so now with this nomination of William Barr, once again, former Attorney General under George H.W. Bush back in 91-93, that nomination will be heard before the Senate Judiciary Committee, I assume early in the new year. And he has definitely put out there, as we mentioned in the interviews with the New York Times and in commentaries, that he has serious questions about the way the FBI and the Justice Department has been operating and operated under the Obama administration. All right, when we come back, well, I guess we ought not be surprised. There have been attacks by the media against President Trump, even in the midst of the mourning for the former president of the United States. We're going to be talking to somebody from the Media Research Council about that, but also the controversy involving the president and the...
With man, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. Kaylin Bennett was diagnosed as a young child with autism spectrum disorder. He didn't walk until he was 4 years old. He didn't speak until he was 7, and he couldn't hold a conversation until he was 8 years old. Kaylin is now the first person in NCAA history to earn a scholarship to play Division I college basketball after being diagnosed with autism. This fall, he will play at Kent State University. At 6'10", 270 pounds, he had numerous options, but he chose Kent State because of their demonstrable commitment to autism awareness. Congratulations, Kaylin.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association.
This is Dr. Richard Land, President of Southern Evangelical Seminary. Welcome to Bringing Every Thought Captive. I hope all of you have had the privilege of seeing and listening to former President George W. Bush's eulogy for his father, former President George H.W. Bush. In the interest of full disclosure, I knew both men, although I know the son much better than I did the father. I first met George H.W. Bush in 1964. When I was an 18-year-old Houston high school volunteer in his unsuccessful U.S. Senate campaign. He was then my parents' congressman from Houston for 2 terms beginning in 1967. I met his son first in 1988 and developed a real bond with him. We are the same age, both went to Ivy League schools, his Yale, mine Princeton. He had 2 Connecticut parents and I had one from Boston and one from Texas, and we were both crazy about baseball. If you know the family, you know that George W. was right when he said, quote, "I may have my father's eyes, but I have my mother's mouth," end quote. Of all their children, W. was the most like his mother, more Pierce than Bush. But George W. Bush profoundly respected and loved his father and desperately wanted his father to be proud of him. He was deeply wounded by his father's loss of the presidency in 1992. And I believe one of his major motivations to run for president himself 8 years later was out of a desire to vindicate his dad. I remember President Bush 41 being asked how he thought his son was doing as president, and he replied, "I don't have one objective bone in my body on that question. I think he's doing great." All fathers could wish their sons would be able to speak as highly of them as President Bush's eldest son did of him. God bless them both. This is Richard Land.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
And welcome back to the Friday edition of Focal Point. Fred Jackson sitting in for Brian today. Well, it's been a historic week, of course, with the death of former President Bush 41 and the funeral services, which most of the major networks have covered extensively, some more than others. And solemn ceremonies, lots of terrific eulogies of people who knew the former president, eulogies, of course, from family members like George W. Bush. And it's been interesting to watch the coverage of it. The mainstream media, for the most part, in sympathy for the Bush family and lauding the accomplishments of the former president during his years in office. And I don't think we would expect anything less. What was surprising, I guess maybe we shouldn't be surprised, that some members of the mainstream media, during their coverage of the funeral services, could not resist drawing in their dislike, their disdain for President Trump. Now, networks are going to have commentaries on their news programs, etc. I understand that. But to do that during their live coverage of these funeral services, I've never seen anything like it before in my life. I've been in this business more than 40 years. Here's an example. ABC News. Terry Moran and Devin Dwyer, our hosts for the ABC News coverage. Have a listen to what they had to say. This in the midst of their coverage of these funeral services about President Trump.
And perhaps a recognition in terms of his involvement in the proceedings by President Trump that he someday will be getting a similar treatment when he passes as a former president of the United States.
Probably a different tone in that funeral.
Perhaps.
He's going to choreograph it, so there may be more trumpets
so
and
maybe he was taking cues. Yes, he would do it bigger. One would imagine.
It'd be the best presidential funeral ever. No one will ever have seen anything like that.
Those are ABC News experienced, not rookies, experienced anchor people laughing about the day that there is a funeral for President Trump and how it will be handled. Like I said, I've never heard anything like this before. I know the mainstream media pretty well hates, disdains Donald Trump. But to show it live on network television when you should be focusing on the solemn occasion that you're covering, they could not resist to bring in their disdain for Donald Trump. Well, another person who has looked at all of this, analyzed it, has reaction to it, is our good friend Dan Gaynor at the Media Research Council. Dan, welcome to Focal Point. Afternoon.
Well, thank you. And you're 100% right. Yeah, it's just appalling. It just is. There's no depth to which they won't go. The idea of essentially fantasizing about Donald Trump's death and then mocking the prospective funeral. I mean, look, this is a typical liberal fantasy, a future without Trump. And they've done everything they can to try to make that happen. Don Lemon was so ridiculous on CNN that he said had he been President Obama, he wouldn't have shaken Trump's hand. And Chris Cuomo, who's one of the most liberal people on television, even he called out Lemon and said that he was petty and small for that. Even he said it's about more than just me, I. It's about the presidency. And even then, that's where they are. So it's as awful as this is, I'm gonna cling to a little bit of hope. When Chris Cuomo is a voice of reason in the midst of media insanity, maybe people are rising up just a bit.
What bothers me, Dan, and I worked in secular media for many years prior to coming here to American Family Radio. But my years in secular media, there was always a gatekeeper. Someone, a producer, a senior producer, a news director who would say, you may have this bias in this area, but I don't want to hear it on the air. And if I do, you may not have a job the next day. There doesn't seem to be a gatekeeper anymore at these major networks.
Well, I think it's actually the exact opposite. I think the people behind the scenes are even more liberal and more openly anti-Trump than the people in front of the camera. So they're pushing the exact opposite. Instead of urging caution and professionalism, they're urging irresponsibility and unprofessionalism. They're urging people to be more liberal, pushing them harder. And so we end up with a news media that is 100% disconnected from much of the people who are supposed to watch it or read it.
Of course, there have been polls done for years and years now that, journalists are right down there at the bottom with lawyers when it comes to the people trusted by mainstream Americans. But I think now there is clear evidence of a huge ideological divide. In the minds of most reporters, the Democrats can do nothing wrong, and the Republicans can do nothing right.
Yeah, I have a shorthand phrase of that. There's not double standard. There's one standard. Everything left is right, and everything right is wrong.
Yeah, and that's exactly where we are. The disgraced former NBC anchor Brian Williams got involved with this. He was analyzing the funeral, And he mentioned the fact that President Trump wore an overcoat to the funeral and handed it to the uniformed officer who he described as acting as an escort. And Williams asked, what's going on there? And expressed that to executive editor Tim O'Brien. And so they're making fun of the fact that the president walked in with an overcoat on and handed it to an aide. I mean, they cannot resist making comments about anything as an overcoat. It was cold outside.
Well, they also criticized Trump for taking a limo a short distance to Blair House to go visit the Bushes. But in fact, even in the article that the Washington Post did, they criticized this. They admitted the Obamas had done the same for security reasons. The president has to, his Secret Service have to worry about security. They just make everything an issue, and the result is nothing's an issue. That's what they've accomplished. People just tune it all out.
Dan, it's going to be interesting to see when the Democrats take control of the House, just how the mainstream media is going to cover the Democrats. I guess we shouldn't be surprised. They're going to be the cheerleaders for the Democrats.
Oh yeah, the new hero of America is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the socialist who has the brains of squash. She says constant stupid things. Remember, this is the American press who destroyed George Bush's vice president, Dan Quayle, over a typo that he read off a flashcard that someone else wrote. They destroyed his career for it. Ocasio-Cortez says wrong, crazy stuff every single day, practically, every time she goes to get an interview, and the press doesn't fixate on it.
No.
They don't just pick teams. They're not cheerleaders. They're leading the other team.
Yeah, I guess when the president says fake news, that's not just a passing comment. It's sadly a factual comment on where we are with mainstream journalism in this country. Dan Gaynor of the Media Research Council, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks. Have a great day.
All right, take care, Dan. All right, another part of all of this, it's not just Donald Trump that the mainstream media has disdain for. The Democratic Party and high members of the Democrats also showing open disdain, and that continues. Want to take you on a little trip down memory lane and then take you up to current day of the kinds of remarks that have been made by Democrats ridiculing Christians, ridiculing conservatives in this country. You may remember President Barack Obama and what he had to say about people in rural America.
So it's not surprising then that they get bitter and they cling to guns or religion.
Yeah, making fun of people who cling to their guns and religion. Now, not to be outdone, there was Hillary Clinton during the 2016 presidential campaign. We all remember her comments about those who supported President Trump as being deplorables.
You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
Well, there you have it. Hillary Clinton. Yeah, that really did her well in the 2016 election. But it hasn't gone away. The Democrats have not learned that insulting people is not a way to get ahead and win their hearts. We had yet another example this week. Democrat Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii, well, she let it be known that the reason still some Americans do not support the Democrats is the Democrats are just so smart.
And we have to kind of tell everybody how smart we are.
We have to tell everybody how smart we are. Some people have noted what's smart about advocating for the slaughter of unborn babies in the womb. What's smart about that? What's smart about supporting sexual perversion as much as the Democratic Party does? Well, there's one more to add to this. This just happened in the last 24 hours, folks. You may or may not be aware of the name of Tom Perez. He's actually chairman of the Democratic National Committee. A leader in the Democratic Party. And here's what he had to say about the problem of the messaging of the Democratic Party.
And I had someone in northwestern Wisconsin tell me, you know what? For most of the people I know, their principal sources of information are Fox News, their NRA newsletter, and the pulpit on Sunday. And it should come as a surprise to no one that our message doesn't penetrate. It should come as a surprise to no one that that person has elevated the issue, of course, to the top, because that person on the pulpit is saying, ignore everything else that this person has done and is doing. We have to focus on one issue of Roe versus Wade. And people buy it because that's their only source. So as we move forward here, we've got to talk about these substantive ideas, but we've got to talk about a broader communication strategy. We've got to talk about other reforms that are going to enable us to elect Democrats up and down the ticket so that we can actually have the capacity to implement it.
I hope you caught that, folks. He said, we have a problem with these people who get their information from Fox News. But he also said there's a problem with people who get their information from the pulpit. Now, I guess it shouldn't come as a surprise. The Democrats, was it 2012 at their convention, had a big vote about, basically keeping God out of the platform. I remember that. So now you have Tom Perez saying part of the problem is that people are trusting what they hear in the pulpit. Now, he said this at a public meeting, folks, Tom Perez, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee. And again, I go to the point that he feels comfortable enough saying that the problem is information coming from the nation's pulpits. And that the Democratic Party has to find a strategy to fight that. Now, we shake our head and say this is terrible, but there's danger in this, folks. Because if the Democratic Party, if you listen to these, if you go back to Barack Obama mocking people who cling to their guns and their Bibles, Hillary Clinton talking about tens of millions of Americans being a basket of deplorables, Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii saying we're the smart ones, the Democratic Party, we just got to bring people up to our level. And now Tom Perez. These are leaders in the Democratic Party, and they're all singing from the same hymn book, and that is we have to do something about these people and where they get their information. And for Tom Perez to deliberately point out that it's bad news for the Democrats that people are trusting what they're hearing from their pulpits. What happens when they gain control? Well, I think there's been indications of that by Obama and Democrat-appointed judges across the country. Talk to Barronelle Stutzman, the florist in Washington State. We're not going to allow you to practice your religion and your business. I think it was it Barack Obama who said that you're free to worship and say what you want in the walls of your churches. I'm paraphrasing to a certain extent. But once you step outside, no. So now what? According to Tom Perez, are they going to start getting inside the walls of churches to stop messages? That's what it sounds like to me. He's worried about the messages that are coming from pulpits. So would the Democratic Party start to do what, there's a case up in Canada right now, by the way, folks, where a church disciplined 2 members of their church who came out as lesbians. They are taking that church to court to remove their tax-exempt status because of what the church did according to Scripture. That's where we are today, folks. And you ought to be very concerned. Democratic Party is becoming more bold. And part of their strategy, according to Tom Perez, has to be to fight the message that comes from our nation's pulpits. You're listening to Focal Point on this Friday. Fred Jackson sitting in. We've got much more ahead. Don't you dare go away. We'll be back in just a few moments.
For well over a century, secular progressives in the United States have worked to alter the very nature of our republic.
Progressives had no problem with saying we can leave the Declaration of Independence behind. For the progressives, there are no longer any God-given natural rights.
AFA Executive Vice President Ed Vitagliano helps you understand the progressive threat to the American Republic. Get your copy of this powerful DVD from the AFA Cultural Institute at afastore.net.
Thoughts of the child you were carrying keep pouring over in your mind. You wish things could be different, and the loss is overwhelming. A deep, unrelenting sadness overshadows your days, and you wonder if you will feel whole again. There is hope and healing from a reproductive loss. Call the International Helpline, 866-482-LIFE, and talk with someone who has been where you are. Your call is confidential. 866-482-LIFE.
A charitable gift annuity through the AFA Foundation is an excellent way to provide yourself with guaranteed permanent income while at the same time supporting the American Family Association. Here's what one supporter told us.
I very much want to see God's Word continue into the next generation. This is a way I can help AFA spread the truth and promote their biblical stand. My experience with the AFA Foundation continues to remind me that I have a small part in helping AFA in the battle for our nation's values.
Financial planning is essential to your family. A charitable gift annuity through the AFA Foundation is one way you can support AFA and the health of our nation. The planners at the AFA Foundation are here to help you do the most with your finances. You can call us at 800-326-4543, extension 345. Find us on Facebook or email foundation@afa.net and learn whether a charitable gift annuity is right for you.
2018 was the busiest year ever for 8 Days of Hope.
Steve Tiber.
Over 6,000 volunteers descended to Southeast Houston over a 3-week period during 8 Days of Hope 14, 15, and 16, and helped over 1,000 families rebuild their homes, all in the name of Jesus. Also, Hurricane Florence hit North Carolina. We had volunteers, leaders, and equipment in New Bern, Fayetteville, and Wilmington. And then, of course, Hurricane Michael striking the panhandle of Florida. We were in Panama City Beach for 5 weeks, loving and serving families who had nowhere to turn. 2019 could even be busier as we plan to go back to some of these same communities to be a glimpse of who Jesus is by using the gifts he's given us to bless those who are looking for a glimmer of hope. Go to 8daysofhope.com, submit your email address, and we'll notify you of our plans in 2019.
American Family Association is pleased to partner with 8 Days of Hope, and you can too. Learn more at 8daysofhope.com.
Be the hands and feet of Jesus.
American Family Radio.
You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
And welcome back to Focal Point. Fred Jackson sitting in for Brian. Focal Point. We don't apologize for being conservative. Not at all. And we are blessed to fight the battle. I tell you what, for truth in these days. And we were mentioning, and we played that montage of different Democrat voices expressing their disdain for conservatives. And that last one from Tom Perez, the head of the DNC, Democratic National Committee, just yesterday, out speaking and mentioning one of the problems is the Democratic Party has to overcome messages from the pulpit. And we mentioned that this is not something new in the Democratic Party. We talked about the Democrat convention, I think it was in Charlotte, North Carolina, in 2012, where there was a debate on the floor with regards to including God in the platform. And we managed to find that clip for you from 2012. Go ahead, Rob.
I am here to attest and affirm that our faith and belief in God is central to the American story and informs the values we've expressed in our party's platform.
All those delegates opposed, say no. Let me do that again. All those delegates opposed, say no. I guess I'll do that one more time. All those delegates opposed, say no.
And there you have it. They were aware they were on network television when this was going on. They were somewhat embarrassed or unnerved by the fact that you had the crowd hollering out, "No, we don't want that in our platform." I remember there was a real kerfuffle on the stage over that. And finally they said, "Well, we think the no's have it." And that was it. It was done. I think that was a pivotal moment in the Democratic Party when, before the eyes and the ears of the nation, they said, "We don't want God in our platform." And again, I think it just followed the pattern of where that party has gone, becoming more secular and more hostile to Christianity. You know, we're talking about the mainstream media and them mocking President Trump during the solemn ceremonies this week, during the funeral of Bush 41. And one other aspect of the coverage, the media tried to make something of the fact when others were reading the Apostles' Creed. I think this was during the ceremony in Washington, D.C. at the National Cathedral. The picture showed that President Trump and Melania did not read the Apostles' Creed. And there were people that were making fun of them for that. Now, I don't know. I'm not here to defend the Trump. I don't know why they did not do that. It is something that is done a great deal in high church services, that sort of thing. I'm not sure what the reason was. But we talked to Pastor Robert Jeffress at First Baptist Dallas, who, of course, he's heard here at American Family Radio each day, Monday through Friday on his program. But also, he is a special advisor to President Trump. So we asked him about this, the controversy over the fact that President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump did not say the Apostles' Creed. And this is how he responded.
This manufactured controversy from the funeral service of President Bush about why it is that President Trump and the First Lady didn't recite the Apostles' Creed, and, you know, just how hypocritical it is for evangelicals to support a president who won't recite the Apostles' Creed. Now, look, I have stood next to President Trump and heard him recite the Lord's Prayer. I sat behind him and the First Lady at Billy Graham's funeral service and watched them sing to him, "All hail the power of Jesus' name." I mean, this is a nothing burger controversy. And I tell people, look, I'm pastor of my church, and there are times I don't recite the scriptures or sing the hymns because I'm distracted by my own thoughts.
There you have it, this manufactured controversy, as Pastor Jeffress said. But, you know, when you have a mainstream media who despises President Trump, I guess we shouldn't be surprised that anything he does or doesn't do is going to come under some kind of criticism. My question is to the mainstream media, why couldn't you just focus on what was happening there? The event, the funeral services for a past president of this country. There is enough to be said and enough in the way of coverage to keep it focused on that. But your disdain, your hatred for this president is so that you have to involve that. These reporters, they even know what the Apostles' Creed is, many of them. I doubt that very much. But, hey, let's make a big deal about it. It was a very solemn week, as we said goodbye, our formal goodbyes this country did to Bush 41. Our reporter, Steve Jordahl, put a piece together that I'd like to play for you, just kind of wrapping all of this coverage up this week.
The day was divided between a hero's welcome home and a family's last farewell. In between, there was an historic train ride so that the people of Texas could pay their respects to the 41st President of the United States. The funeral at St. Martin's Episcopal Church was rousing in patriotism and firm in faith. Eldest grandson George P. Bush spoke with love.
Today, after 94 years, the heavy hand of time has claimed the life of my Gamps. But in death as in life, my grandfather has won, for he has exchanged his earthly burdens for a heavenly home and is at peace.
After the service in Spring, Texas, the Bushes and the casket boarded a special train pulled by an engine painted in Air Force One blue, bound for College Station. Thousands lined the track for a last goodbye. At the school, the slate gray sky let go a steady drizzle, as if the very heavens over Texas were shedding tears for the loss. Pastor Robert Jeffress of First Baptist Dallas says it was a rich and full day.
Many people in the state who loved President Bush are certainly sad to see him go, but they're also, I think, celebrating the life of a truly great man, a great patriot.
There were no speeches at College Station, but the reverence hung heavy in the air as the college choir sang a hymn, the cadets stood at attention, the artillery gave a 21-gun salute, and more than a dozen Navy jets honored the former combat pilot with a missing man formation.
And I think he illustrates how God raises up certain leaders for certain times. He was exactly what this country needed at that time, not in just our nation's history, but in world history.
I'm Steve Jordahl.
And I thank Steve for that. Great job on that, Steve. And that's what the coverage should have been for all the networks. Just cover the event. That's what people want. They don't need your editorial comments, folks, on the president. Pastor Jeffress just said something interesting there, that God had raised up President Bush back there during his term, Bush 41st, for particular times in our nation. And I really do believe God has raised up President Donald Trump for such a time as this. And one of the things, and conservatives and Christians are aware of this, I think one of the reasons that God has blessed President Trump and is using him is because of his support for Israel. There's no question about that. Just yesterday, we celebrated the announcement from the Trump administration that they would move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And we know other presidential candidates down through the years, Republican and Democrat, they all promised to do that. But President Trump is the only one that has done that. Pete Hegseth is a correspondent with Fox News. He has been in Israel this week, and he was able to sit down yesterday with Prime Minister Netanyahu, the leader of Israel, and talk to him about the relationship right now between the United States and Israel. And here's a little excerpt from that.
Our relations with the United States are based on a deeper thing, the deepest of bonds. It's the bond of values, of a common heritage, of a belief in a common destiny, of freedom and democracy and truth. And this has been the basis of America's support for Israel from day one when President Truman recognized Israel. Yes. That was a historic decision. And President Trump's proclamation is a historic decision which carried the relationship to even higher ground. Israel's relations with the United States have never been stronger.
Well, there you have it. That's Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel speaking just yesterday in Israel about the special relationship between this country. You know, when I think of the United States and its support for Israel, I always go back to Genesis 12, 1 and 3, where God says, I will bless those who bless Israel and curse those who curse her. And I really do believe it's one of the reasons that President Donald Trump has been blessed in this country. And I also think it's one of the reasons why he faces such strong opposition is because of his support for Israel. There's something demonic in it all, quite frankly. And we ought to keep our prayers going for President Trump, but also for the nation of Israel. Praise for her. They're facing brand new threats from, normally we hear the story, it's from Hamas in Gaza. But now, just this week, there was the news of the Israelis discovering a tunnel coming in from Lebanon. And Hezbollah, the terrorist group we know, is behind that. The word is that Hezbollah is pulling their forces out of Syria right now and are now going to focus once again on Israel. So always pray for the nation of Israel. By the way, Hexeth was saying this morning on Fox and Friends, he is putting together a special on Israel. I'm not sure when that's going to appear on the network, but it'll appear on Fox Nation, I think it is. I think that's what it's called. Yeah. So be watching for that. Well, speaking of special dates, and remember special dates, Rob, today is December the 7th, and very special date in memory. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, it's the day that will live in infamy. It's the day that, well, this clip that I found sort of says it all.
Puts it all. And we're talking about Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor. The attack. The attack out of the clear blue skies, killing thousands.
Yes.
And putting us into World War II.
Exactly. Go ahead. Take us down memory lane.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
And all of a sudden, see these planes dropping bombs in the distance, and then, of course, when they started coming to us, and you see the bombs start dropping around you, this is no drill. This is it.
And the torpedo planes were making their runs on the battleship Row, and that was all on fire and exploding. All we could do is fight off the airplanes as it came by.
The attack was launched at the very moment Japanese peace envoys in Washington sought to continue peace conversations with this country.
Arizona was on fire, still smoldering in flames. The West Virginia was sunk. The California, and here we were upside down. Such carnage that they had done to us. It was hard to believe that any country on earth could have done that to our battle fleet.
No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
Man, thank you very much, Rob. We must never forget the price that has been paid for freedom in this country. And I think it's one of the reasons that in 2016, candidate Donald Trump was elected president, because one of the strong platforms was that he would support our military.
Yes.
Not just with words. Those words are important, but also back it up financially and policy-wise. And he's done exactly that. And to make our nation strong. Because we need a strong defense force. There are forces, evil forces that are out there. But we need a strong commander-in-chief that are going to support what needs to be done to protect this nation. And this nation has been constantly reminded of that through the years. So be praying for our president. And you see a veteran today, thank them for their service, as we always should. Fred Jackson sitting in for Brian today here in Focal Point. It's been a pleasure to do that. Brian will be back in the chair again next week. In the meantime, stay tuned to much great programming here on American Family Radio. You have yourself a blessed weekend. Get to church, fellowship with fellow Christians, be strengthened by what you hear from your pulpit. God bless and bye for now.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
Secular progressives in the United States have worked to alter the very nature of our republic.
For the progressives, there are no longer any God-given natural rights.
AFA Executive Vice President Ed Vitagliano helps you understand the progressive threat to the American Republic. Get your copy of this powerful DVD from the AFA Cultural Institute at afastore.net.
This is American Family Radio, a listener-supported ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Keith. President Trump has announced his nominees for a new Attorney General and Ambassador to the United Nations. John Decker reports.
President Trump confirming that William Barr, who served as Attorney General under President George H.W. Bush, will be nominated to once again